So I'm going to make the announcement in English and in Spanish. So I'll be really quick. In English, if you want to hear the interpretation in Spanish, you're going to see the globe icon at the bottom of the menu bar. If you're on a tablet or an iPhone or a Samsung or a Galaxy device or any kind of device, you're going to see the 3 points that say more. You're going to click on the more button. It's going to give you an option of menu drop down selections, and you're going to select interpretation, and then you're going to select Spanish or English, and then done. And then that'll give you the option to hear the Spanish or English version. You don't need to do that if you don't want to hear the interpreter. Otherwise, I'm now going to make the announcement in Spanish. Buenas noches. En un momento van a ver que se va a iniciar el globo terráqueo en la barra de menú y va a darle la opción de presionar en el globo terráqueo, le va a dar el menú de opciones. Después van a seleccionar español, interpretación español o inglés, dependiendo de lo que desean. Si están en una tableta o un aparato dispositivo móvil, van a seleccionar los 3 puntitos, le va a la barra de menú, van a seleccionar español o interpretación y luego español y luego listo, finalizado o done. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Mario. So before we start, let me just make sure I do this. Cool. Jumping into it, we're really excited to have Lyla June on the call today. Just a few quick reminders about the webinar. One, it's being recorded. Two, we're gonna let Lyla present, and then towards the end of the presentation, maybe about 15 minutes in, we'll check in with them to make sure that we're still good on time and they're okay with taking questions. Throughout the chat, we'd love to hear where you're joining us from. So drop your name in the chat. I did see some names already in there. I saw Steph and Ray, a couple other friends, Colleen and Elise. So thank you for adding your name in there. Just shout out where you're from, where you're coming in from, your pronouns. So yeah, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We'll keep an eye out on the questions, and then when it's time, Tucker and B and I will make sure that those questions are asked. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for joining our call. Tucker, B, do you have anything else to share before we let Lyla introduce themselves? Awesome. Lyla, take it away, please.
Hey, well, I'm just so happy to be here and so honored. And I'm so appreciative of the work that you guys are doing. So important and so gives so much hope and safety and skills to the people. So, you know, I'm honored to be a part of this group today. So I wanted to talk today about Indigenous regenerative food systems and Indigenous regenerative ecosystem design. Because I think that these systems have a lot to teach us as Indigenous peoples and as any peoples, because these systems were really prolific and abundant. And in some cases, they still are, despite 500 years of attempted genocide and colonization. So yeah, these stories that I'm about to tell you might be surprising to you. They might not be something you've ever heard of. And I think they'll be very helpful to you because they show many different instances when Indigenous people, or rather human beings, were not only not harmful to the earth, but were actually catalyzing biodiversity, catalyzing beauty, catalyzing ecosystems health, and that our very presence as Homo sapiens was a great gift to the land. And so, yeah, you might not have seen some of these stories before, but because a lot of them were hidden from the historical record, either by ignorance or on purpose, because they countered the colonial narrative that Indigenous peoples were primitive, that they did not work the land. John Locke, Thomas More of England kind of had this theory that you only own the land if you work the land, if you kind of cultivate the land. And so for that reason, they didn't really want for Native people to have cultivated the land, because that by their own laws, that means the Native people owned the land. That sort of was borrowed from Roman law too, which said it's private land once you put your labor into it, once you kind of sow your own seeds there or cultivate it, then it becomes yours. It's sort of a strange sort of framework for the privatization of land in its early days when those laws were just being conceived. So there was a direct incentive by colonial cultures to downplay and downsize and in some cases completely omit or completely destroy stories in which Native people were working the land. But we did not work the land in small little ways. We worked the land in really large landscape scale ways. So that's another big difference from what I'm about to show you. And conventional agriculture is that for the most part, Indigenous peoples did not farm little plots of land. They gardened whole forests, and they didn't have little oyster farms. They managed whole estuaries. And so these are really gigantic cultivation projects that occurred on scales of thousands of years, and were carried out by very dense populations of Indigenous peoples. And so, yeah, let's get into it. Let's see, I gotta find my little thing. I'm just going to go through some slides to kind of share visuals of this story. So this is a picture of a Florida riverbanks where there used to be actually there still are these archaeological sites of huge piles of oyster shells. Just to kind of give a visual that this is based on actual archaeological sites in Florida. Just to give you an idea of the abundance of food production in the Florida riverbanks. So I'm just going to go through a few ancient and contemporary case studies and the strategies for food production and the underlying philosophies. The first case study that I want to share is actually the chestnuts of the Shawnee Nation, as well as other nations. The chestnut was a really important food source for Indigenous peoples. It's now been almost completely wiped out due to a blight. In the early 1900s, almost all the chestnuts disappeared. Its historical range was from Maine all the way down to Mississippi, throughout the Appalachians and beyond. And people used to think that these chestnuts were sort of naturally occurring, but now we understand that these were actually planted, propagated, and maintained by human beings, by Indigenous peoples. And so here's a picture of a chestnut tree on the left-hand side with Tsalagi or Cherokee people. And you can see the massive diameter of these old growth chestnuts. On the right-hand side is a picture of a tree that's allowed to be a tree and grow horizontally as well as vertically. And the reason I put this picture in here is because it actually is related to native management of chestnuts. So the way that the native people would manage the chestnuts is they would space them very far apart. So you can see this chestnut is allowed to be a tree. It doesn't have competing neighbors around it. If you have like 100 trees per acre, the trees will actually grow tall and skinny, fighting for the canopy, because they don't have an open area. So when the colonists came and they saw the chestnuts, they were so excited that they started propagating them into rows in monoculture. And that's not the native way. The native way is more like mixing the chestnuts with hickory nuts and black walnuts, having a polyculture versus a monoculture, and also spacing the trees out properly, so that when you space them properly, you can also burn the forest floor safely, because there's so few trees per acre, maybe 13 trees per acre maximum, that, and there's such old growth, gigantic trees like this, that when the fire comes up around them, they're too big to really start a big forest fire. And you never get these huge crown fires that you would have if you have hundreds of trees per acre kind of close together that could start a big crown fire. So part of the management of the chestnut groves was to space them really far apart and to burn underneath the forest. And the reason you would burn is, there's a couple reasons. Well, there's many reasons. One is to eliminate any competing vegetation that's coming up. So you're going to keep the saplings down that are trying to come up, which maintains the spacing of these, privileged kind of old growth trees that you kind of want to be the main features of the landscape. And then you also have, when you burn, actually stimulates the growth of other plants, such as grasslands, different types of medicine plants, different types of basket weaving plants actually thrive in the wake of fire. So you're sort of also creating grasslands every time you burn, because that ash goes into the soil, and within a few weeks, nutrient dense grasslands can pop up, and then you can have herbivores. It attracts herbivores to burn and then create these grasslands and these meadows. So burning also kind of cleared the understory for travel, not only for humans, but for animals too. When you burn every few years the same place, you have opening up meadow that can facilitate corridors for wildlife. And so sometimes when you go into the forest around you guys in Chicago, I'm sure you've noticed it's so thick and dense you can barely walk through it. So burning has a lot of functions. It also brings charcoal and ash into the soil, which stimulates microbial activity. So burning was a really big part of indigenous food systems, and we're trying to revitalize that today. And I actually was at Oakton College near Chicago the other day, and they were doing prescribed burns there, interestingly. So it is catching on, reigniting our old fires. People are remembering how to do this. So there's a place called Cliff Palace Pond in Kentucky, which is the traditional homeland of the Shawnee. And this area, I've actually been to it, has sort of evidence of this type of chestnut forest management. And the reason why is because you can take out a soil core from the pond, and the soil core will actually have fossilized pollen layers stacked up on top of each other. And those fossilized pollen layers can go up to, tens of thousands of years old of sediment records that we can examine and see how the vegetation changed over time by looking at the presence or absence of different types of pollen. We also see fossilized charcoal showing up in the record too, so you can kind of reconstruct the fire history of the area. So what we find when you take out these soil cores in Cliff Palace Pond, of course, the oldest sediment will be at the bottom and the youngest will be at the top, is this graph that I'm going to show you. And the graph has 9,500 years worth of information of the presence and absence of certain types of pollen. So as you can see here, 3,000 years ago, so the lowest, deepest part is 9,500 years old. And as you go up, it's younger and younger. So 3,000 years ago, you can see the chestnut pollen kind of comes in really strong, which we believe indicates human agency here, as well as hickory nut coming in really strong. And then here's black walnut coming in about 2,000 years ago, which you can tell just kind of comes out of nowhere. There's also these edible plant species that native peoples domesticated and cultivated: sumpweed, sunflower, and goosefoot. These are really important edible species as well. You see some plantain and dock coming in a little bit more in the colonial period. But you also see fossilized charcoal, which indicates that this system was upheld through routine, more consistent burning of the forest floor by indigenous peoples. So scientists interpret this to mean that around 3,000 years ago, people showed up and transformed this from mostly a cedar dominated forest to a biodiverse food forest. that is really strongly showing domestication of species, if you will, through and managed by routine burning of forest floor. So that's all to say that, you know, this is evidence that these the extent to which the chestnut could be found historically is very likely human assisted, if not human enabled. And that this chestnut forest was not wild or accidental. It was a massive garden that was tended by indigenous peoples for a long, long time. You can see here that this food system they created persisted for 3,000 years without interruption. Well, there's a couple interruptions here and there, but maybe this is where they learned how to do it better. Yeah, this big zip right here. Who knows, you know, what the story is here, but definitely way more edible species coming in than would be by chance. The next one I like to talk about is the Kwakwa clam gardens. These are rock walls that are created by human beings. And this rock wall is about 2,500 years old. And on the right-hand side of this dark line is also a human-made rock wall. And these rock walls actually, when the tide comes up and the tide goes back down, the rock walls will catch sediment and kind of fortify themselves over time to they become a retaining wall. And the retaining walls actually hold back water when the tide gets low to create these intertidal pool, massive intertidal pool, which is perfect for clam habitat. And that actually is created by this rock wall here in the white rocks. Just as an example. And when you put these white rocks in, it actually creates more of a level shoreline, which the clams proliferate in, and they can even transplant clams and sort of plant clams to create biodiverse clam gardens. There's always going to be a few different species of clams in here. Again, you always want to do diversity. So these are 2,500-year-old clam farming system. And without the rock wall, this shoreline would be much steeper, you know, if you didn't have that rock wall there to kind of create these intertidal pools. And the cool thing about clam gardens is you need to take clams out of them for the clams to keep growing, because the clams, also, I forgot, Mario, you're translate. I can talk a little bit slower. Thank you for, you know, for translating today. So the clams, when you take the clams out, the clams have more space for the little clams to get bigger. So this is the type of system where Mother Earth needs you to take clams out or needs you to harvest from her for her to keep producing in a healthy way. So it just gives us a metaphor of the abundance of Mother Earth. She actually needs us to harvest from her for her to be healthy, similar to the chestnut groves. You kind of can't just let it all grow in a big bunch of trees. You need to kind of thin it a little bit so it has room to breathe. And the clam gardens are really importantly not about feeding humans only, not only about feeding humans. It's also about feeding anybody who wants to come and eat a clam, such as an otter, water birds, raccoons, minks. Lots of different species will come and eat the clams. So this system is very intentionally not just for human consumption. It's for all life to enjoy the nutrition that is augmented. And here on the right side, we see all these different red lines are where we find anthropogenic rock walls. So you can see thousands and thousands of meters long of man-made rock walls that they augmented the clam habitat on the island by 35%. This is right north of Vancouver. So the clam gardens are a very beautiful example too of ecosystem engineering, eco-mimicry, mimicking the conditions in which clams thrive and recreating those conditions. The Ahupua'a system of Hawaii is also very fascinating because you have these watersheds that each watershed is a political district. Each watershed is called an Ahupua'a. And the Ahupua'as are also food production. I want to say like systems. because each one has a very similar pattern. Because in the very top is the realm of the gods, so you actually would not go up there. You maybe would just pray there. And then below that, you would you would plant the kalo. I'm actually wearing earrings of kalo right now. This little root plant that a Hawaiian sister gave me. Very important to the traditional Hawaiian diet. And then below that, you would have the breadfruit trees. And then below that, you would have your fish pond and maybe some other elements, but that's sort of the standard, you know, production levels that you would find as you work your way down to the sea. And the fish ponds have holes in them, kind of like the clam garden, but with gates. And the gate is a thing that the fish can get into, but then they get so fat that they can't get out. And they eat on all the nutrients that flow down from the ahupua'a. So it's a holistic system. It works together. And there's the kalo fields, the lo'i, have a special bird that really is really healthy when they do nesting in the kalo fields. So this farming system, it actually supports what we call quote unquote wildlife. I put it in quotes because, like, is it really wild if humans are kind of cultivating it and assisting it and sort of co-creating it? And so the bird, this endangered white bird, it really flourishes in the kalo fields. So that's sort of a cool thing about this technology and this farming is that instead of like commercial farming where you're keeping everybody out, you know, you don't want the rabbits to come in, you don't want the raccoons to come in, you don't want the birds to come in. It's like these systems actually invite those things to come in and say, hey, like there's enough for everybody here. And this system, we estimate, supported about 1.2 million people. And that 1.2 million people is more than what live in Hawaii today. So looking at archaeology and the carrying capacity of the ahupua'a system, scientists do believe and they do estimate that there were more people living in Hawaii than there are today. And they were producing 100% of their food locally. Whereas today we have less people living there and they're importing 90% of their food. So I tell that story because I want people to understand that indigenous food systems have the power to feed dense populations. They're not just for small tribes and nomadic people, which is what people try to pigeonhole us as, just small groups of, you know, nomadic people. But actually we have the largest cities in the world. When Columbus got here, we're not in Europe. We had larger cities in North and South America than Paris and London at the time, 1492. So, and the way we had these large cities is we had really sophisticated and abundant food systems that supported people. This one is actually in Illinois, so this is sort of, you know, connected to where you guys are at, but the American Grasslands Pyro Management is sort of a broad term for a lot of different food systems that were in the Great Plains or any grasslands areas, Midwest. So the Illinois Confederacy shaped and altered much of this region as an anthropogenic creation. Like many other indigenous groups in North America, their most important tool was fire. Burning the prairies, they made the grasses hospitable for grazers and managed prairie as a game reserve to maximize productivity. So what this means is that every time you do a burn, you attract herbivores. And you attract herbivores because every time you burn, you're actually maintaining grasslands. I know it sounds counterintuitive that to burn the grass creates grass, but I'll show you a video in a second to show you how when you burn, it creates more nutrients from the ash that is available to the soil. If you don't burn, you have to wait for all those dead grasses to compost, and that can take months or years. So when you burn them, you're instantly mineralizing them into bioavailable nutrients in the ash. And so that's why burning actually speeds up the nutrient cycling process, and so that you can have nutrient-dense grasslands year after year. And that attracts herbivores because they like to eat it. So the burning was so important that the Miamia indigenous nation, who was indigenous to the Ohio River Valley, they have a lunar calendar, and their September moon, the full moon in September, is called the grass burning moon, and the October moon is called the big smoky moon. And so there's only 13 moons, full moons in a year, so you have to be very special to get your own moon. But fire got 2 moons, and this just shows how important burning is to Indigenous peoples, that it was integrated into our lunar calendars, which taught us what to do and when. So this is a publication from the Miamia Nation, from their research center in Ohio at Miami University. It says, in Sasha Kayolia Kilsha, or the grass burning moon, we see fire as something that restores and gives new life to the prairie. Fire helps clear the land of old grass and brush and opens seed pods that have fallen to the ground. Because of fire, new flowers and plants emerge in the spring. So when you burn the land for so many thousands of years, the plants actually start to become pyro-adapted, meaning they actually thrive in the wake of fire, and some of them even are fire dependent. In fact, the tall grass prairies of the United States are fire dependent. They cannot exist apart from fire, which leads us to believe that Native people were really burning these places regularly. Some of the plants have seeds that the cover of the seed is so thick that it needs fire to break it down so that the seed can germinate. One of those plants is echinacea, the medicine plant. Echinacea actually needs fire to germinate, or not, it doesn't need to germinate, but it really likes fire, and it thrives in the wake of fire. This book is Forgotten Fires. It's a really good book about how Native people burned this whole area. And this whole continent almost. And this just goes to show how important fire was to Indigenous agriculture, because whenever you burn, you create grasslands. And whenever you create grasslands, you create protein for your food. And you also feed the buffalo with fire. And the buffalo feed us, so we have to feed them. So we imagine Native people chasing the bison all around the plains, and we did. However, the bison also were following us. The bison were following our fire as our fire opened up meadows and grasslands. As far east as Pennsylvania and as far south as Louisiana is where we find bison habitat in pre-colonial times. So it was through our fires, at least in part, that we supported such massive bison populations in the United States. This is an example of my brother's farm where he burnt one half and he didn't burn the other half. So you can see here, the half that was burnt was this side, and the half that he did not burn was this side. So you see the side that has been burnt is much more green and much more lush. And he did this test just to see, what the effects were of burning. And he found that burning really, really created more nutrients in the soil and really helped to create a more healthy grasses. So this is just an example done in 2024 of how burning really, really does help the soil. It helps the vegetation. And so this is why fire is medicine for the land. I am going to go forward just a bit because I don't have time to go through all these, unfortunately. But I do want to share a few things. This is actually the same exact scene we see in Norway, the burning, burning that actually creates productive grasslands. I like to show this to show, it's not just a Native American thing. This was happening around the planet. So what do these stories tell us? To me, they tell us that Homo sapiens can be a gift to the land, that Homo sapiens can be a keystone species or a species upon which entire ecosystems depend. Because we see in all these cases where that humanity became an asset to the land. Humanity became a contributor and a catalyst for ecosystems health. And we see Indigenous regenerative ecosystem design as what I call it, where you have large, holistically managed systems that create abundant food for the people. So what are the characteristics of Indigenous regenerative ecosystem design systems? We have, holistic, they're landscape scale, they're ecosystemic, meaning they're really leaning on the processes of the tides coming up and down, of the buffalo migrating when and where they want, of the flow of water down the watershed in Hawaii. You know, they're working with the flow of nature and sort of just standing there with their cup to catch the abundance that and the kinetic energy that Mother Earth is already doing. So they're really working with the ecosystem and how all these forces are working together to create food. It's sort of a mixture of like farming and wilderness, almost like a mixture between the two. Yeah, it's like half and half, you know, it's like not just humans where they're just putting everything in rows and controlling everything, but it's also not wilderness where they're just gone, you know. So these are all millennial scale. So everything I just showed you is at least 1,000 years old. They focus on habitat expansion and really creating homes for our food rather than caging them. There's a big difference between a home and a cage. The effect is the same. Either way, we have animals here that we can eat if we give them a home or a cage, but obviously the home is much better and much more respectful. So if you create homes for your food will come to you rather than caging them. And, you know, stewardship mentality, you know, that it was really based on an ethic of stewardship rather than extraction. So the human body is like the hardware and the human mind is like the software. And so it's not that the human body is so bad. It's more that sometimes our mind becomes driven and the software drives the hardware of our body based on values that are not helpful to us or to the planet. And sometimes we just have to upgrade our software or, you know, debug it from selfishness, hierarchy, etc., so that we can become a keystone species again. So what makes the difference between a human being a pest and a human being a gift is this software here. What are they operating on? What are they assuming as they go out into the land? How do they see themselves? How do they see the earth? All those things go into how the human body will behave. So this is a good example of a native software, the value system of the Anishinaabe 7 grandfather teachings. We have honesty, humility, wisdom, love, respect, bravery, truth. So these are the 7 grandfather teachings that Anishinaabe people have to pass on to the next generation. And this is the core of all of their society. This is the software that governs how they behave. And this is their core values. And each value, each virtue is represented by an animal. And so this is how the Anishinaabe people learned how to be powerful gardeners of the earth too, with their wild rice and all of the things they did, because they approached the land with these 7 principles as well. And so there's like the ruler software that says we are the rulers of the earth. And then there's the guardian software that says we're the guardians of the earth. And depending on which software you adopt as a society, your world is going to look very different. And the earth is going to be in a different state. This is my friend Colleen Sisk. She fights for the salmon and the water in Northern California. Metaphor of the bird bath is this idea of like the guardian, you know, the guardian will give gifts to nature. The bird bath is like one of the few Eurocentric things where you're giving a gift to nature. You're giving them a place to rest, a place to drink, a place to bathe. It's not something where we are benefiting from it. It's really just a love note to creation. And St. Francis de Assisi, he became a saint through his service to animals. And I think when we serve animals and we give them gifts such as clam garden or lo'i fields or a chestnut grove, and we have so much food that we can share it with all life, that sort of like elevates us spiritually, so that we take all this power we have as humans and we place it in service of life and serve species outside of our own. So I think more and more we have to make more bird baths, metaphorically and literally, for the earth, so that we can support other life forms. That's the real flex, right? Where you're not only able to take care of yourself, but you can have enough energy left over to be of service to the birds and the beavers and the land and the deer, and just be a good landscaper, be a good host to other animals and plants, and feed them dinner every now and then and make sure that they have what they need. At the very least, don't destroy what they need. So this is sort of the software I find. of Indigenous regenerative ecosystem design that we see sort of across the board is that these are the driving values. We have like respect, reverence, reciprocity, responsibility, relationality or kinship with life, restraint, and regeneration. These are sort of the things that I find across the board. So the key takeaways for me, I don't know, maybe you have your own, is that humanity has been a keystone species before, and we can become one again. Our technology does not need to change as much as our values do. We can take what we need while nourishing and regenerating Mother Earth at the same time. There's a win-win. Everything can thrive here. We don't have to destroy the Earth for us to be happy, and we don't have to be unhappy for the Earth to be healthy. Everyone can win here. And this is scalable if and only if we follow the leadership of local Indigenous traditional leaders. And so kind of changing the record or correcting the record of Turtle Island from terra nullius and no man's land to actually what it really was and what it could be again is a densely populated and extensively managed continent, managed in a regenerative way that supports life. So that's sort of the main gist of what I wanted to share today. If you want to learn more, Architects of Abundance is the dissertation. It's free, it's open source. So I have a lot of examples in there. And yeah, I think we can open up for some questions if you like. And I'll put the slides in the chat so you can have access to them too.
Alexi, I saw you.
Lyla.
Alexi,
We
I
had
saw
a
that.
couple questions come in. The first one was from Alexi. Alexi asked, what was the plant? And this was a while ago. This was at 6:27. Alexi, did you want to remind us what the conversation was at the time? So Lyla might be able to answer.
Yep. We were talking about the system in Hawaii. You said they were earrings.
Yeah, well, it's called a lot of people know it as taro,
Okay.
but in Hawaiian language, forgetting how to say Hawaiian language. It's like Pareo. Anyways, it's called kalo in their language, and the creation of the field, like the field itself, is called a lo'i. So taro is sort of like the English word, and kalo is the Hawaiian word for it.
Would you mind spelling it for me, please?
Yes, no problem. Taro or Kalo.
Thank you.
Yep. As for the cadence of burning, I think the honest answer is I don't know. As much as I am a pyromaniac after doing all this research, I don't have a lot of actual practice doing it. Although I have attended a couple burns in my life, and they're very fun and very interesting. But I do know that there's such a thing as patch burning, where you'll burn a certain area. Like you burn this patch one year, you burn another patch the next year, and you burn a third patch the year after that, and then another patch the year after that. And then each patch is in a different stage of regrowth, a different stage of succession, which has a different set of flora and fauna. So that's how you can actually increase the biodiversity of an area, is by creating different stages of regrowth everywhere. So different patches will have different plants and animals. So you kind of have like different, that's when you have so many different zones of different flora and fauna, that's biodiversity. So in those systems, it appears as though people more or less will be burning like once every 5 years or once every 7 years. But it definitely depends on what you're trying to do and where and what time of year it is. So it seems to me that you'd probably want to burn a place at least every 3 years, maybe every 5 years. But again, the honest answer is I don't know. um, I know that in Navajo country, in the Chusco Mountains, we see that Dene people used to burn routinely, and we see a fire scar record. The tree rings have recorded the fires over the centuries, and it looks like people were burning like once every 7 years, according to the tree ring data. So, but I wasn't there. I don't know honestly. But I do know that in California, Redbird, one of our elders, he said that if the deer look hungry, do a burn. Because as soon as you burn within a week, you're going to have nutrient-dense grasslands for the deer to munch on. So it might also be in that way too, where it's like, if you just want to stimulate growth really fast for some reason, you would probably just burn whenever you want. Happy to answer any more questions, or I can kind of go through some of the slides that I didn't get to.
Yeah, I see one more question in the chat from Tucker. What was the, oh, that one was already answered. Yeah, okay. Why don't we run back through some of those slides that you were really excited about before we end our time?
Yeah, and then I just saw a question from Greta Larson. So she asked, can you talk about your work post-dissertation? What are you excited to work on now and in the future? So I am definitely doing a lot of speaking and giving this speech. The reason I'm sound kind of tired right now is because this is like my 11th city that I'm at. So I've been traveling around the country and the world, like sharing this information for different reasons and different contexts. So, but I'm kind of thinking of next year not traveling so much and focusing more on supporting, bigger projects that I'm looking at. Specifically, we want to create like a Turtle Island Indigenous Women's Congress where we just kind of get all the women together virtually and get the women together and united and talking about what their visions are for the future, for representatives from different Native nations. Yeah, I also have this class that I started, or this school that maybe you guys want to take some classes with someday. It's called Rehuman School. And we created this school to support mobilization of humanity towards a more regenerative practice. So if you want to come to any of our upcoming classes, you are welcome to. We just finished the Becoming a Regenerative Human class and the Building Solidarity with Indigenous Communities class. And in January, we're about to launch the Food Warriors class, where we're going to try to mobilize people to plant seeds together, and learn how to be food producers locally. And that's a big thing too. We're also trying to launch like a solidarity tourism thing, where we're trying to, let people come into the reservation, not as a tourist to just see the sights, although we'll do that too, but also to understand like the real subjugation that they're going through and the real oppression that we're going through, so that when they leave the tour, they're more educated about the real history and the real struggle. And we have more alliances by the end of by the week, and we give people ways to support and help and be in solidarity with local nations, and of course make money at the same time, so that those communities can also think just sustainability too. So we're kind of some like projects going on next year for sure. And yeah, that's mostly it. Okay, I'll go through some more slides then. Yeah, yep. Let's see, where was I? Okay. Hold on, sorry. Oh, I think I deleted it. There, my slides. Okay. So where I left off was right here. So this is the Mebengokre or the Kayapol soil management system called Amazonian dark earth. It's also known as terra preta. And that black A horizon there on the left is completely human made. So this black loamy soil would not exist without Homo sapiens. And they took them like thousands of years to make that soil. But there's a lot of charcoal in it, as you can see. There's actually some pottery shards broken in there. I forget exactly how and why they do the pottery shards, but I think it's about something to support the soil, maybe aeration, maybe water retention. I don't know, but I want to look into it. I'm actually going to go visit the Mebengokre people in March. I'm really excited. And the guy in the middle is showing off his black loamy soil that he and his ancestors have been cultivating for millennia. And on the right-hand side, every one of those black dots is where we find Amazonian dark earths. And so you can see, it's just like the ones that scientists know about, right? Like there's probably a lot more black dots on this map. But it just goes to show like the extent to which human beings influence the Amazon River Basin, like quite a large, part of South America where these human-made soils are present. And they're done through, like I said, burning, but also relay cropping, intercropping, planting certain nitrogen fixers, interesting creative amendments like termite piles and all types of things that you would use to create this living soil. The Baure people, do a form of, well, they used to, it's been mostly destroyed from what I understand, but they do floodplain aquaculture in Bolivia, where like as the waters come up during the rainy season, and then the waters go back down, these earthen walls will funnel the water as it goes down into these funnels and into pools, which will capture the fish. And along the walls, they would plant their fruit trees. They also had canals. A computer rendition of some of these cities we find. There used to be like canals and causeways for transportation, settlement mounds to keep them dry when it rains really hard, forest islands when you want to keep your agroforestry a little bit higher than the floodplain, raised fields for agriculture, ring ditches, the fish weirs, like I said, these funnels, and then the reservoirs where the fish would spill into as the waters went down, and that would create a year-round supply of fish. And there's also a lot of snails like escargot, so the fruit trees, which would attract game animals, so they can hunt the animals that come to eat the fruit. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting aspects of this very productive food system. And this aerial photography shows these old walls that were made, and the little pools that were made. And I just think it's amazing how after almost 500 years of weathering, we can still see evidence of this old system. Imagine what it looked like in its heyday. We could see so much other things. And this is the area, this black dotted line, that we find this aquaculture system. And just to show you how much of an extent Homo sapiens influenced the land and how they use water to their advantage. They weren't hydrophobic, they were hydrophilic, kind of welcomed the water and, like, again, working with the ecosystem, working with the flow of land, or rather the flow of nature, for lack of a better term. It's kind of similar. We have the Shiwi or Zuni runoff agriculture technique, where which is also practiced by Dene and Hopi, and most desert people do some form of this, where you plant your corn and beans and squash at the base of small watersheds. And every time it rains in the monsoon season, you're going to be catching sort of this alluvial fan of water. And what's really interesting about this system is that you will also catch a lot of nutrients that are coming down from the hills. So every time it rains really hard, your field is getting injected with not just water, but also with nutrients. And so you can plant year after year and still have healthy corn, because every year there's more nutrients being flooded into the area. So that loamy soil, the Zuni call it forest soil, and that forest soil comes down into the cornfields, and it helps to fertilize the soil. So you never have to let it fallow, because it's constantly getting injected with nutrients. And what's really interesting about this too is that you don't really have to wait for the water to come to start planting, because it's sort of like a little water sink here. The water is stored in this area over the years. So you can basically plant seeds any time of year and they will grow, because there's so much like a battery storage of water. And it's just like the place to plant your seeds, working with the natural topography of the land, working with the natural flow of water, and going with the flow. So I could say more, but I also wanted to share a recent thing that was just published that I heard you guys talking about water. It might be interesting to you. Let me just find it real quick. Here we go. So this is a book that was just published by my good friend, by the name of Julia Watson. She wrote this book. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but Low Tech, Designed by Radical Indigenism. And it kind of talked about, indigenous systems of terra culture, agriculture, different ways of working with the land around the world. This is actually in Iraq. These marsh people, it's really cool. But she also wrote this book, she just published it, and it's talking about water technologies, and she uses TEK as in like traditional ecological knowledge, and different ways that people would work with water, or still do actually, and how these can help us with desalinization, storm water management, so I think she said flooding, transportation, agriculture. So this might actually be the Lo'i. Yeah, that's the Lo'i, the Kalu, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's not in Hawaii, but it's the same plant. So yeah, I wrote the foreword to this, which I'm really honored to have been able to do. You can see here they're doing a similar thing as the floodplain, or rather the alluvial farming, the runoff agriculture. So anyways, I just want to show you guys that in case you were interested in learning more about really cool indigenous system. And yeah, I'm just really, really, really grateful to you all for giving me a little bit of time to hang out with you and just sharing a little bit of stories about the people and hopefully inspiring us of what we can do, what's possible for us to do for our people and our future generations. And I do have to go, unfortunately. I have to run to a thing right now, but it's such an honor to spend some time with you. And I thank you for your wonderful questions.